we are going to, before I give too much explanation into what the seminar is about, what our talk is about, I do want to get something started because it is fairly time sensitive. So here I have already toasted, fresh out of the oven. My apartment kind of smells like chocolate chip cookies right now. Some cocoa nibs. I'm going to take 100 grams of these toasted cocoa nibs, toss them into they're not super hot. I'm not worried about melting this bag. But had they just come out of the oven, I would certainly be cautious about putting them into plastic. But so again, 100 grams of lightly toasted cocoa nibs. And we are then going to finish this little mixture with 500 grams of rye whiskey. Why is my scale being difficult? There we go. Great, so 500 grams of rye whiskey. I am using Copper Sea straight rye whiskey, a new favorite of mine that comes from the Hudson Valley. Really, really, really special stuff. They've become friends and great supporters, collaborators of the New York and American rye whiskey sort of revival. 500 grams there on top of our 100 grams of toasted. Actually, let's give them a shout out. If you have not had this rye whiskey, and if you're a fan of rye whiskey, definitely seek it out. It's a new kid on the block, but an extraordinarily delicious spirit, a labor of love from the team in the Hudson Valley. They make rye whiskey like in a style that I've not had before. It's really robust. The way I describe it to people, you know, when you're drinking Copper Sea, you know you're drinking rye whiskey. It's really, really special, and distinguishes itself from its other American rye whiskeys, certainly New York rye whiskeys. So here we have, again, our mixture of 100 grams of toasted cocoa nibs and 500 grams of New York rye whiskey directly into the bath here. We have this 80 degrees Celsius bath going, and we have our nibs and whiskey circulating. May I ask, why is it that I picked 80 degrees Celsius? Can anybody take a quick guess? Throw up your comments in the chat or your answers in the chat. Nobody? Cool. The reason is because volatility. Yeah, it's related to that for sure. The reason is principally because ethanol boils at 78 degrees Celsius. That is the temperature that we want to make sure to either bring our alcohol, in this case, in the solution of water in the whiskey, it just to the precipice of that temperature, or, you know, depending on what we're trying to achieve, perhaps past it if we're really looking to infuse and potentially evaporate and essentially distill, right? But in this case, I want to bring it just to that brink of 78 degrees Celsius where ethanol will start to boil, so that I ensure I get this as hot as possible without actually exploding, right? So if I were to set this at 85 degrees Celsius, I would run the risk of the ethanol boiling and my bag actually exploding. And in the case of the bag, that would create a big mess. But if I was, you know, if I was silly and I used glass, God forbid, or a metal container or a plastic container, it would actually create a pretty dangerous explosion. It'd be like a little grenade in here, right? So the reason I set this to 80 degrees Celsius is because I know that my bath is going to be having cool things dropped into it on occasion. There's quite a bit of water in my solution with the whiskey already because it's only 48 proof, 48% alcohol. And I know that I'm going to be watching this thing and it's going to be in here for about an hour. So that 78 is not an arbitrary number, set to 80, just above 78. And we can ensure that we're getting the most extraction possible from those cocoa nibs without going too far, So now, second thing that I want to get started while we are chit-chatting is a bit of smoke, right? So, and this likewise will take a bit of time. So I want to get this started earlier than later, and we'll return to it periodically as we bump along throughout the demo. So my goal here is to get the tip of the smoking gun hose just to the top of this heavy cream, right? And by filling our smoking gun with applewood chips, alcohol evaporated at lower temperature than water. That is correct. Absolutely true, Kevin. But because we have this in a sealed environment, in a bag, we don't really have to worry about evaporation, right? Because it's all going to stay contained. But that's entirely true. It does evaporate at a lower temperature. So here, Applewood chips going into our smoking gun. The smoke will go to just the surface of the cream, which is intentional, so that we're able to create bubbles of smoke. And we're not worried about maintaining the bubbles as much as we want to get as much surface area, as much action going, right, on the cream. And that is because, why? Why is it that we are using cream here, team? There we go. Little bubbles going. I wish you could see more clearly, but I assure you there's plenty of smoke going into this cream. Maybe if I get my earpiece closer, you can hear it bubbling. So the goal here is that we have lots of bubbles on the top of this cream and lots of smoke, therefore, going into the cream. We'll continue to ensure that there is, see that beautiful active smoke going in and plenty of bubbles. Could also use a fish tank ceramic bubbler, 100% true. Yep. I've used ceramic bubblers and lots of aquarium equipment in past for all sorts of infusions. Pet stores are extremely handy for doing things like this. But we're really, I'm very happy to use this Breville Polyscience smoking gun to get this smoke into the cream. Now, why the smoke and why the cream? Does anybody tell me how, perhaps a chef in the crew here, how do you make smoked mashed potatoes? Anybody guess? Or tell me the right way to do it? Hotbox a bus with that thing. Yes, you absolutely could hotbox a bus with this thing. You make smoked mashed potatoes. Do you smoke the potatoes? Do you smoke the butter? Do you smoke the cream? Do you smoke the water? How do you do it? If it wasn't already evident, you smoke the cream, right? Because smoke, as we know, yes, thank you, ISVA account. Exactly right. It's not, and yes, Mark, that's correct. Fat holds the smoke better because fat is in fact the solvent that attracts the molecules that are the flavors and aromatics in smoke best. If we were to try to smoke the potatoes themselves, let's say we boil the potatoes and we milled the potatoes through moulis or whatever, and then we take those beautiful, fluffy, hot, right, perfectly cooked potatoes, excuse me, and we put them into a hot or cold smoker. We let them hang out for a little while. We pull them out and we taste those potatoes. Undoubtedly, there will be some sort of smoke that adheres to the surface area of the potatoes, but in fact, we get way more smoke by simply smoking the cream a little bit and then folding that into the potatoes. That is because fat and smoke really like each other. And anybody who's ever eaten bacon or taken a class on charcuterie can certainly attest to that, right? So by thinking about solubility, right, we're able to change the way, the processes by which we incorporate smoke into food and drinks. And specifically, I think drinks are a lot of fun. You know, I see smoking guns being used a lot, and people are sort of like burning little staves from barrels and then turning cups upside down to collect the smoke, or they're smoking maybe a decanter that has an old fashioned, etc. But you know, the thing is that smoke is very minorly interacting with the spirit and the water and the citrus or whatever is in that drink, right? It's very cold. Typically cocktails are served at a cool temperature, so you're not getting a whole lot of the smoke penetrating into the cool. And also, you know, fat is a far better solvent for smoke than either alcohol or water will ever be, or acid for that matter as well. So, you know, in this instance, we're using to our advantage the high fat content of heavy cream to gather and collect and hang on to the smoke from these applewood chips. So again, we're gonna come back to this over the course of the next 30 minutes or so and smoke it a few more times and actually get some more fresh wood chips for this eventually. Now our bag swelling slightly, but nothing concerning. But man, did that color get deeper, right? Super cool. Much darker, presumably from the cocoa nibs. Great. Now, let's measure out some sugar. This is a basic turbinado sugar, right? I really enjoy using turbinado. It's not quite as intense as a Muscovado or something really dark, but it has way more flavor than a white granulated, or even like a basic brown sugar. I really enjoy turbinado very much as sort of like a mainstay sweetener, especially if you're making something that is going to ultimately be rich and dark and chocolatey, right? So I did 250 grams of the turbinado sugar into this beaker. Word to the wise, I know everybody already knows this, again, preaching the choir, I'm sure, but I always prefer to snip bags open as opposed to unzipping them, because if you unzip it and you try to pour through it, it usually gets caught. Something usually gets caught. It's not as effective. Watch, I'm going to spill this. Perfect. Beautiful. Now, some of you may say, why are you pouring this directly hot into the sugar as opposed to chilling it as you did for the tea? Anybody got some ideas? To melt the sugar. Damn right. Because if I try to add that sugar, this sugar, to my whiskey, especially at 48% alcohol, it will not dissolve. There's too much ethanol for it to dissolve at room temperature. But by taking advantage of this higher temperature, the solubility will increase, right? And we're able to get our sugar into the mix, So again, talking about solubility as the focus of this, it's not just about moving flavors or moving colors. It's also just about getting something fundamentally integrated into a mixture, into a basic mixture. Same way to make sweet tea. That's right. So virtually all of the sugar has been dissolved into the whiskey. And think about that. 48% ABV alcohol, willingly, happily taking all of this sugar, no problem. That is not something that you could achieve at room temperature. If we were to take this exact mixture and put it into the fridge, we would start to see some of the crystals of sugar precipitate out. So this homemade now creme de cacao, what we made. Let's add a little pinch of salt in here just for fun. Cooking. If we were to take this and pop it into the fridge, the sugar crystals would start to precipitate out. And so we're going to keep this creme de cacao, this dark creme de cacao, at room temperature always. And should we start to see the sugar crystals start to precipitate out over time, which can happen, all you would have to do is to safely take your bottle with the top off or decant into a new container and place it into a hot water bath, being very, very careful not to seal the container until the sugar crystals dissolve, right? But man, this is beautiful. All of the sugar is now dissolved. The sugar has also done me a favor and cooled off the spirit a bit, right? So it's still warm. It's still warm for sure, but it's not piping hot. I can definitely hold it without feeling discomfort. It's actually kind of nice. So if we were to take this, yum. If we were to take this exactly as it is and put it in a bottle at room temperature, we would have, in my opinion, one of the finest creme de cacaos that you could possibly imagine. So we have excellent cocoa nibs and we have excellent rye whiskey, like truly superb rye whiskey, and unbeatable dark creme de cacao for all of your cocktail needs, or just sipping over ice. Honestly, it's delicious. But I figured, since we have this cream, smoked cream, let's make something even more unique. A smoked chocolate. It's crazy how smoky this is. I recognize you're not here trying with me, but man, it is so intensely smoky and delicious. And now we have created a smoked chocolate whiskey cream, right? And it's all about solubility. If we're not thinking about solubility, this isn't possible, right? If we're trying to smoke the spirit, not possible. Smoke the cream, right? If we're trying to dissolve our sugar, I suppose we could dissolve our sugar in our cream. That would be fine. But were we to use this, or were we to have stopped at creme de cacao level without the cream, right? Then we would have been forced to add water, right? We would have made like a rich, simple syrup and then added that to our whiskey, which is fine, but you're adding water, right? You're adding dilution. And it always drives me nuts whenever I see people unnecessarily diluting their spirits that they make in-house, etc. You know, dilution should occur in the glass or in the shaker, in the mixer, etc. Let's have this be concentrated and intense. So without the addition of any water, any pure water, we've taken an overproof rye whiskey, successfully dissolved turbinado sugar, pretty coarse grained turbinado sugar into it, right? And then further combine that with a really, really incredibly intensely smoky, like really, really impressive, fat soluble, fat friendly smoke cream here, right? This is going to be a delicious after dinner drink. And I will say too, now that we've added the heavy cream, which is a dilutant as well as the sugar to the alcohol, I'm betting that even in the fridge, this is not going to precipitate any sugar crystals. I bet this is going to be completely stable, which is very, very, very exciting. It's so simple. Unrelated comment. Another advantage of sous vide is that when your water heater goes out at home, you can keep a container of hot water hot all day to help into washing dishes. Completely agreed. Very sorry to hear that you're going through a tough time, Carmen, but thank you for sharing. Cool. So I want to let you know how delicious this is, how much I anticipate it is delicious. That's great. It's boozy, really. It's honestly my first time using the Copper C. It will not be my last. It's my first time using the Copper C whiskey, this 48% stuff for this spirit, for this particular cream. And it shows. It definitely wears that higher proof beautifully. It's really, really good. The smoke is subtle. You know, when the smoke was just by itself here with the cream, a little bit overwhelming, honestly. I mean, if we were to use this to make mashed potatoes, amazing. But the sugar of that raw, beautiful turbinado sugar has sort of taken the edge off of the whiskey just enough, taking the edge off the smoke just enough. The cream is not overwhelming. It's not fatty, but it is luscious. I think this is going to end up, in fact, I brought one. This is going to end up in a bottle in my fridge for after dinner on a regular basis all winter long. And Mark, you'll have to wait 6 months or something until, you know, your winter, and then you can make yours. But also too, I will say, you know, I always have so much fun making spirits like this, if you have room to store them, making them significantly in advance. You know, I do feel like spirits that have age, that have fat, that have alcohol, they rest really, really nicely. And there's sort of an evolution that happens in the bottle. So I'm not afraid of making this. I'm afraid of spilling it. I'm not afraid of making this ahead of time, even by a factor of months, because they will age and cellar really, really beautifully. And I recommend that everybody give it a try next time you're making something for the holidays.